Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hope all is going well. We've been doing some research on the agentic frameworks over the period of time. One framework that we have widely used is AutoGen, but then we are also looking at the other possibilities, and one of them is langGraph. Because langGraph is being getting very popular around last few months, and then the reason for that popularity is also it's being tightly coupled with the observability tool that is langsmith. So we've been looking at langgraph and langsmith all together and how we can fit them in some of the use cases. Thinking from that perspective, we'll be creating some video series for langgraph and langsmith, talking about both of them and covering them with some use cases. So the first use case that we have got in mind is the research assistant, how we could give some agents to work upon one some research topic and produce some research report. But this is going to be, if I cover this all together in one video, this might be too much. So we have decided to cut down into some short videos. So first thing first, what we are going to do in the first video series, we'll have some research assistant which will take the topic that it will do some research. But before doing the research, it will use the LLMs to generate some analysis. So that is what we are doing is we are providing some research topic, defining some number of analysts, how many analysts that we would want to create through LLMs, and at the under the hood will assign some personas to those analysts and create some personas of those analysts. So that is the overall idea in this first video that we'll look at. We'll define the topic, we'll define number of analysts and generate some analysts and view them on the UI, how these analysts look like. So one thing cautiously that I've decided that I'll do all these things to some UI so that it becomes much easier for all the kind of audiences, whether tech or non-tech. And in the meantime, we'll also cover some of the important part in the code that we have gotten. All right, so let's get started. Let's get kick off. Cool. So what we have gotten, we are looking at the UI right now, and then we are going to define some problem statement. And then before we look into the code part, let's look at it how what is going it to do. So the research topic, it says that Microsoft Q3 report and its impact owing to investments made by Microsoft in generative AI startups. This is one of the prompt that I've defined, but you could think of any of the topics that you would want to do. Here is what we are saying that we would want it to generate the number of analysts, 3 analysts that I would want to generate that over the period of time when we do some other videos, when I publish other videos, these are the analysts that will take part in the report creation. But for now, let's look at their personas, what is going to happen. So as soon as we say generate analysts, it generated some analysts, and let's look at those personas. So here are some analysts that have been created. These are the names, these are the affiliation of those analysts, the role of that analyst, and finally what is the description. So each analyst has been defined some persona based on the topic that we have defined, some role that is being defined. And then let's look at how that was possible to happen. All right, first thing first. So what we have done, we have created few things under hood that helps in doing it. By the way, all the code that is being generated is done using Cursor. Cursor is an AI editor tool that is being used very widely. Helps you to fasten the process of creating a UI, creating modifying your code based on what you are looking forward to develop. So it really fasten the process of developing something real quick. So that's what I've done. And then we have defined few things over here. So if you're looking my screen on the research assistant.py, you would notice few things that we have initialized. We have initialized the language model. We have set the environment variables. One of the important things that we would need over here is a LangChain API key, and we need to set a LangChain project. I'll talk about why we need to do that when we come to the langsmith. So essentially, we need one project that we would need to define so that we could look at the observability part of our project. So what we are doing first thing first is we are defining a pedantic model which will take in few things from the user, which is what we have defined, which in our case we just took the research topic, but under hood we are doing few things. We are defining the affiliation, that is what you could see on the screen, the name, the role, and the description. So all these things have been defined within the pedantic model of our analyst input schema. And then, as always, the langGraph works with some states. That is, a state is always a type text, and then it takes in all these states and create a graph. But before creating a graph, of course, it looks LLM expects some instructions for these personas to be created. So what we have done over here is we have created a system message and a human message that comes from the UI, of course. So if we look at this function create analyst, what it does, it looks at the state over here, which is being generated out of a state that is being generated containing of topic, analyst, human, and analyst list. So we are taking in a state that is being defined by us, and then we pass it all the way to our function create analyst, which is enforcing a structured output to come from an LLM. And that's the key part. So what we would want always, we would want when we are creating a personas, LLM always follow a certain way of defining, an agent. When we are defining an agent, we would want it to follow certain ways to give the output in some form. We could do it via prompt as well, but then if we use a pedantic model, which will have some structured output, it ensures that the way that we would want those analysts, certain name roles are never missed out. So that's what this LLM structure output does. It will ensure that our pedantic model that we defined over here is being respected, and it follows that. Finally, we just takes in structured LLM and invoke a system message. This is a way of invoking an LLM. You could take in the system message, you could include the human message, and that's it. You could you could then pass it all the way to the analysts, to the you could just invoke it and then return the analysts. Finally, what we are doing is we are creating a length graph of I mean, this is a very simple graph that we have created for the sake of for the sake of this demo purpose. I can show you what it looks like. It starts and creates an analyst and then just end. But over the period of time, when we navigate to the other videos, you would see it grows up. I mean, it would have create analyst as a first step, then there would be some interviews that would be done in parallel, and then finally it would do some while it does the interview, it search the web, it returns the result, everything in parallelization mode, and then ends it up. So the first thing first that we wanted to talk about is creation of analysts within a length graph. That's the first graph that we have created. It starts off, it creates the analyst, and it just ends. So that's the graph that we are creating at this stage. We are creating a one simple graph and then returning this graph. All right, so that's what we are doing. From the code perspective, this is simple research assistant.py file, and this app.py is simply doing some streamlit things that will help us to look at the things on UI and give us the result. There is one method that's been written to convert the image of the graph and then render it and save it so that we can look at how our graph looks like and how our agents are going to a view of those agents, how they are performing. Cool. So that's something that we have done. From the UI, we created some agents. We got some agents created, and now let's look at the most interesting part. How do we look at them in the observability part? That is langsmith. All right, so what we said that we would have one project created on langGraph in our code. This is something that we got created already, research analyst, assistant analyst generate, which would have a few things that runs under hood. In our case, we are going to look at the runnable sequence of the langGraph, and then let's see what it is doing. So the importance of langsmith is when you would want some observability around what's happening under hood with your prompts, with your human message, with your system message, and you would want to really take a stock of the things. Now let's look at the first thing that we did when we invoked the LLM. We said that LLM dot invoke. What all it did was it was taking in the input message that was comprising of two things: the system message and the human message. If you would notice in the system message, whatever was passed in our code, you could really see that running right on the UI in your langsmith, in the langsmith. So it takes all everything that whatever you have passed in, it comes in on the UI of langsmith, and it gives you a nice way of taking a look at what is happening over here. Now, if you notice, what we have done is we have got an output which is giving us in a specific form, and that was the output that we got on the UI. It showed all those names, that okay, what is the name, what is the role, what is the description, and so on and so forth. Now, it is very initial stages where you could see all those things, but think of when we have multiple things, we have multiple tools running under hood which are doing search query or on the web, then it would be really helpful to really look at how those agents are using those query tools and creating a report on the UI. Now, similarly, we created a pedantic model, and if somebody from the from the usage perspective of this application would like to really understand what is our pedantic input model looks like, they could really look at it. I mean, what is our input model looks like? You could look at it that it has few things. It has role, name, description, affiliation, and all those things have been defined. And how the output looks like, it gives you an output. You could really look at all those output right over here in the output panel. So whatever things you run from the code, be it a pedantic model, be it calling an LLM, you could all see all together, together from the language. Now, so that was one part of it. Now let's say I'm interested in looking at few things of how much tokens it consumed, what was the cost it consumed, and what is my thread ID. Of course, this might be not helpful from the end user perspective, but this might be something that when you're working as a developer on creating an agent, these threads are going to be really helpful in terms of few things when we talk about in our later series on memory, on how do we create the memory using the long-term or short-term memory for our specific sessions. So for this call, it took over 338 tokens and a few cents, and then the latency can also be viewed around it. So what is helpful over here is you could really spin off an application using one cursor AI editor tool. That is what we have created. And then what we have done is we have shown you a way on observability part where you could go out and take a look at how langsmith helps in looking at the observability of your application. So that was about this short video where we talked about creating a research assistant. It was provided a topic, it was provided the number of analysts, and then we generated some analysts. We looked at briefly on what we are doing underhood in the code so that we could understand what we are really looking on the langsmith. So all those prompts, what we were writing in the system message now are really viewable to someone who would want to look at the observability part from langsmith. And that's it. Thank you. In the next series, we'll talk about the interviews that these analysts will conduct with the experts using the tools. Stay tuned.